something? Sorry, everyone. We're doing our first. I don't know how to get that off the screen. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the GEF. Sorry, our camera is not working at the moment. This is our first hybrid BBL, and we are still working out some of the kinks in making this all come together. So my name is Sarah Wyatt. I am a senior biodiversity specialist at the GEF, and I coordinate our engagement with Indigenous peoples. And so I would like to welcome you here today for the presentation that we are going to have. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that the GEF is located on the unceded territory of the Anacostan and Piscataway peoples. And would you like to wait until there's visuals? So you want me to just, okay. We're gonna do a little moving things around, and I'll just give some background about the GEF and how we work with Indigenous peoples before we get started. So the GEF has worked with Indigenous peoples in various forms since the beginning. The pilot phase of GEF-1. Now, as it stands, the GEF requires that all projects that impact Indigenous peoples or have the involvement of Indigenous peoples need to include FPIC, or the free, prior, and informed consent of those peoples and what they do. But beyond that, because that is simply kind of a question of doing no harm to peoples, GEF projects also are required to do good when they're engaging with people. So positively benefit the well-being and livelihoods of those people. Sorry, we're still working on the camera. It was working before.
Yeah.
Kidana, what do you suggest?
I'll quickly disconnect and reconnect.
Do we have to disconnect into everything? No, just a meeting room.
This room.
Okay. Yeah, should we try to do that?
Okay, I can do audio.
You can still be in the meeting from your laptop.
Yes.
Yeah, if you can try to do that. Thank you.
Code followed by the pound sign.
Can I make a request that now that I can actually hear that everyone
You are in
okay. Back to this, if you can hopefully get someone to confirm that you can hear us.
Yeah, can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Still no camera connected though. So as I was describing, the GEF is committed through our projects and through our work to both do no harm as well as do good when working with Indigenous peoples to support human well-being and protect the environment at the same time. One of the other ways that we engage with Indigenous peoples is through our Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group, or IPAG. We're lucky to have at least Lucy, I can see on the call, joining us. And let's just ask you to start your video. So at least I can maybe do this. There we go. Oh, we have something. Hopefully this will work. Okay, so our Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group has been around since 2012, and I'm kind of proud to say that some other organizations have picked up our idea and are using that approach as well. One of the products that came out of the IPAG was a white paper on financing opportunities for Indigenous peoples within the global environment. And what this paper pointed out was how few opportunities there really were for Indigenous-led initiatives for the global environment, including within conservation, to be funded, and particularly at a scale beyond sort of a small grant scale. So taking a step kind of back to talk about why this is important and why this gap matters, why the lack of funding for Indigenous peoples matters. Cite the often cited statistic that 80% of the world's biodiversity is found in territories owned or managed by Indigenous peoples. It's also estimated that 70% of global forest carbon is found on Indigenous and community lands. And at the same time, Indigenous peoples often face difficulty with legal recognition of their lands and practices, things that have been in place for centuries or longer. One WRI report that looked across 15 countries found that Indigenous peoples often have to work and wait for more than a decade or even several decades to claim their lands or have their lands recognized, while companies seeking to undertake extractive activities or large-scale agriculture often can obtain permission within a few years or as little as 30 days. At the same time, actually this summer I was very lucky to visit another one of our inclusive conservation projects. And there in Kenya, I had someone tell me, well, conservation is a bad word for us. Conservation has often been associated with kicking Indigenous peoples off of their land, barring their access to their resources, and other things, even though these are exactly the people who have been conserving that land. If it's areas worth conserving, the people have been there, that they're doing just fine in how they're managing the lands. The GEF has a particular challenge in that our main interlocutor is often national governments. Not as much of our resources actually reach Indigenous peoples, and in particular Indigenous-led work, as we would like. And globally, studies have found that less than 1% of climate aid goes to Indigenous peoples, even gets lower than that if you really look at Indigenous-led initiatives, and even specifically to land tenure. So I think the statistic was 0.2% of climate finance dedicated to lands and land tenure was going to Indigenous peoples. So in GEF-7, as part of our replenishment process and our programming directions, we included something called the Inclusive Conservation Initiative, which is a $25 million project that is aimed at supporting Indigenous voice within the environmental community, to support Indigenous-led conservation on the ground, as well as encourage those practices and more inclusive practices to be used within the conservation community and the broader environmental community. Working with our Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group, IPAG, we we issued a call for proposals and selected a proposal from Conservation International and IUCN to be the lead agencies for this project. And they then put out, so as we then move this forward, they then put out a call for proposals for the sub-projects, of which this is one. So the sub-projects of the ICI in March 2020, which of course that timing was not great, but even with that timing, we received over 400 proposals and many, many excellent proposals that we were not able to fund as part of the Inclusive Conservation Initiative from GEF-7. Working with the Indigenous Interim Steering Committee for the Inclusive Conservation Initiative, 9 sub-projects were selected, one of which was Payne's project with the with UCRT. And so I am realizing I don't have your bio in front of me. Anita, would you like to introduce, would you like to offer a blessing or anything, or what do you think? Okay, now that we have some visuals back, I'm going to go back to what was previously on the agenda, and this is kind of customary if you work in the Indigenous communities or with Indigenous communities to start any meeting or an event with a blessing or reflection to get started. Today, for those of you who may be aware, November 1st is the Day of the Dead, and a very important day across at least the Americas and many Indigenous communities. So I'm going to ask Anita Sek, who is Maya Yucatec from Belize, and she is the lead for Indigenous Peoples at IUCN and the technical lead for the Inclusive Conservation Initiative at IUCN to offer us an opening. So let me point the camera at you. It's challenging.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the GF for hosting us today. I can't see how many people are online. Is Claude online?
Yes, coordination.
Okay, Masahachol, Lain, Anitatsek, Lat, Hanal Pishan, Sai Maya Yucatec. So it's a saludo, it's a greeting in my native language. Today for Maya people, according to our calendar, is 5-5-Ik. 5-Ik is the day of the wind in the Mayan calendar. And also for us, we call it Hanal Pishan. It's the day when our ancestors return to our homes to feast with us. It's what is known in Mexico and other parts of Latin America, and which has been known now here in the US as the Day of the Dead. But for us, we don't call our loved ones the dead. They are our ancestors. And today in the Mayan calendar is 5-Ik, 5-Ik. Ik means the wind. And it's not a coincidence that it is the day of the ancestors or the day of Hanal Pishan. The wind is one of the elements from Mother Earth that transcends different dimensions. So it is the wind that today will connect us with our ancestors. And in the case of people who don't celebrate the Day of the Dead or the Day of the Ancestors, it is the day when your loved ones, their energies are traveling, they're better seeking a way to connect with you, they're seeking a space in your home. And so today I told Sarah, especially because I know at the GEF and in the hearts of many of us, we recently lost Gustavo Fonseca, which I know is a very sensitive time still for the GEF. And I wanted to do something especially for him today. I hope, I'm not seeing Paul, but I hope he's there, because I brought special candles, and because we cannot light them in the GEF or we'll have fire alarms going off. I want to leave one of these little blue candles with each of the people who are present here today, because for us, blue represents the wind. And I will ask you to take it home, and later today, at the end of your day, to offer it in nature. If you are close to Gustavo, you can speak to him and reiterate your compromise as the GF or your commitment to the work that he started. For us indigenous peoples, he is a friend, an ally, a brother, and we highly appreciate all the work that he did and all the support that he gave us indigenous peoples from his space at the GEF. So today, that is the day of the wind, is the day of our ancestors. Seek to connect with him, seek to offer him a little candle, and that the candle and its light may lead him with that energy and strength that the wind also brings for us. Remember, the wind is life, it is breath. So let him continue living on in that dimension where we can no longer see him, but we know he's there. So thank you, Sarah. I'm sorry. It's also a sensitive time for me because it's the day that I seek to connect with my dad, who's also a very strong indigenous leader and who taught me that the wind is the strength. It is the way he connects with us, and that his teachings will continue. So I offer this to the GEF. Sarah, I'll leave it with you. But I also have a special one for Claude. Claude, the white candle that I will leave with Sarah is the specific candle that we offer to ancestors today. This is made out of the oil from de la grasa del ganado, from cattle. This burns really fast. So this is the one that I will leave first with you, Sarah, for Claude, because I know he was like a brother to Gustavo. And this is the special candle that you would be able to light and speak to him and connect with him. So I hope you have the space and the privacy and the time to be able to do that. So I will leave this too for you to give to Claude. So thanks again. Thanks for the space and for the respect to the indigenous practices, to our spiritual connection. It is important for us because this is how we connect to nature. This is how we connect to Mother Earth. And this is why our work as indigenous peoples is key in every single space that we are able to influence. So I say thank you to the GEF. Thank you for receiving Pain. She's an indigenous sister. I work at IUCN, but she's my sister. I'm not seen as a technical person, but as the person that is also working along with our sub-projects in ICI, with my brothers and sisters, to ensure that we advance indigenous priorities, indigenous rights. And I really and highly appreciate this from the GEF, because I know we will never get 100% of what we want, but we will advance. So thank you for the space, and may the guiding spirit of the wind be with you today. May it guide your path, may it re-energize you, may it connect you to your ancestors, to your brothers and sisters who you have lost, and remember them with that energy, with that breath of fresh air that the wind also brings. Masahachol.
Okay, so thank you so much, Nita. This is also brought up a lot of emotion for me. So I think that's important. And so without further ado, I want to welcome him to join us and to share the work that she is doing with her community and her organization to support Indigenous peoples, move forward Indigenous rights, while realizing conservation, climate, and land degradation benefits, among others. So I'm handing it over to you now.
Thank you, and hello to everyone. Thank you, Anita, for that very deep connection to our ancestors. It's a very special moment for all of us, and I'm sure all of us felt connected in a way. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Sarah and Anita, for organizing this. And thank you, Jeff, for having me in your offices and for giving me space to present about our work back in Tanzania. So my name is Pain Marco. I come from Tanzania, and I work with an organization called Ujamaa Community Resource Team, UCRT. In the part.
Yeah, so kind of just remove this from here.
Okay, so who is UCRT or what do we do? UCRT is a non-profit environmental organization that works with indigenous people in Tanzania, particularly pastoralists and hunter-gatherers communities in the northern part of Tanzania. So earlier on, we realized that there was a challenge in the land sector where collective land rights were not recognized. And what happened is the collective land that is usually open and accessible to both people and wildlife kept shrinking in size. And so Ujamaa Community Resource Team, or UCRT, facilitated the first ever collective titles in Tanzania with collective landowners, which are pastoralists and hunter-gatherers communities. And those titles were communal certificates of customary right of occupancy. But together with that, supporting the governance process of land and natural resources within the communal lands for these communities, but ensuring that women, youth, elderly, and other vulnerable members of the community are part of these processes to make sure that decisions made on land and natural resources are inclusive. So for indigenous communities in Tanzania, and I'm sure around the world as well, land is life. Without land, these communities will not be able to live their normal lives. They will not be able to thrive. They will not be able to have food in which they derive or they get from the environment. And as you can see from the photo, this is a picture of the Hadzabe community, which is an indigenous community in the northern part of Tanzania. After days of hunting and gathering, they are relaxed and enjoying life in the natural environment, and that's how they live and thrive. So land is very critical for their survival and for them to continue living peacefully. So this is a peek into the kind of landscapes we are talking about. One of the landscapes in which we work in of the hunter-gatherers community. Earlier on this year, when Anita visited us back in Tanzania, we went to this very same spot, and it was really great to share into the lifestyle of the Hadzabe community and understand how they relate to the environment. But also from this space where I'm speaking, I can see one of our landscape photos, the Serengeti, where I come from. That's a really beautiful picture of also one of the landscapes in which we work in, but one of the landscapes in which I was born. So in terms of working with pastoralist and hunter-gatherers communities, UCRT uses 5 strategies or 5 thematic areas of coverage to be able to achieve its goals. And one of them is securing communal or community land rights, in which I will get into the details of that in a bit. But secondly, to develop effective and accountable governance institutions for these local communities to be able to govern land and the natural resources within their institutional boundaries. But also third, improving social empowerment and equality amongst all members of these communities. Fourth is strengthening sustainable management of communal natural resources that exist within these lands for improved livelihoods of these communities. And fifth, but not least, increasing opportunities for nature-based livelihoods. Livelihoods is everything. Being able to survive and thrive in the environment gives significance to these communities and also gives significance to the environment. So when we talk about land tenure, what is it that we do, or how does it work in our context or in our institutional perspective? So 70% of Tanzania's land is under village lands, which means the villages that exist in those, the communities that exist within the village boundaries are owners of that land and have the mandate to, manage and protect the land within those boundaries. And so the villages in which we work, or the communities in which we work, live in villages. And a village is basically the smallest political unit in the Tanzanian context. So in terms of securing land tenure, it's a step-by-step process. So we look at conflict resolution before you can do anything. So a village has a neighbor village, and there has to be no conflict between the two villages to be able to demarcate or do the first step in securing land rights for these communities. And so using community engagement and mediation processes and traditional mechanisms, we support communities to resolve conflict between a community and a community, and then you are able to demarcate the boundaries of a village and issue what we call a village land certificate. So after we have a village land certificate in place, we undertake land use planning, where communities decide what to do with their land, the land that is within their boundary. And in most cases, for pastoralists and hunter-gatherers, it means that 80% of the village land goes to collective use, land that is accessible to everyone, and land that is used by everyone in different ways. For pastoralists, collective land means grazing land for every member of that village or that community. And for hunter-gatherers, it means that they use the land in a sustainable way to hunt and gather fruits, tubers, and wild honey for their survival. So again, the land that has been under threat for a long time has been this communal land, which is normally seen as open and empty and unused. And so this is where we layer the collective or the communal land with a collective title we call Communal Certificate of Right of Occupancy to protect these indigenous territories and livelihoods, but also the wildlife. So most of the communities we work with are either, bordering national parks or protected areas, and therefore there is a lot of interaction of wildlife within and outside the village or community land boundaries. And so it's estimated that 60% of wildlife from protected areas move in and out of community lands. And so protecting that land to continue being open, it's both very useful for people and the wildlife within those areas. So when we talk of natural resource management, the first thing we do is land use planning, that communities plan their lands according to their traditional uses that are necessary for them to survive. But also communities are able to develop bylaws that stipulate what rules and regulations will govern their land and natural resources. And in case someone violates these laws, there are consequences to the violation of these laws and regulations set by communities. But again, for pastoralists particularly, we support develop grazing management plans and calendars to make sure that the land is used sustainably and that there is no, for example, overgrazing in the area, to be able to allow also sustainable environmental protection. So in terms of grazing management, we partition the grazing lands into blocks and make sure that they have a systematic rotational kind of grazing patterns in which they graze to a certain period, to a certain level of grass measure, and then have to move to another block to continue to allow the land to rejuvenate and to continue sustaining the environment, but also the livestock within those boundaries. So one other component that is critical to make sure there is sustainable protection of land and natural resources is the governance component. So the big thing we do around here is to make sure that there are local institutions that know their roles and responsibilities to be able to support the natural resource management and land. So in most cases with the local communities, these governing structures do not exist. So we support to develop these governing structures, but also to make sure that these governing structures know their roles and responsibilities to allow accountability for the entire community in terms of the decisions made over land and natural resources, but also ensuring that all members are part of this collective decision making in the governance systems. The other critical thing is around nature-based livelihoods. Livelihoods is everything, and if communities thrive, then the environments also thrive. And there are a lot of existing resources within the pastoral and hunter-gatherers environments that they could, advance, help support their livelihoods from. And so our role really there is to ensure that there is use of these opportunities to be able to support the livelihoods of pastoralists and hunter-gatherers. Some of the key things are that we support and ensure that we promote is community-based tourism to generate income for communities, but also connect communities with ethical investors on carbon project or easements to make sure that there is that extra income that supports, promotes social services within the community. Another key component is social empowerment, and in social empowerment, we are focusing on gender and promoting equality and equity within the communities. For the hunter-gatherers, they have equal power sharing, so that hasn't been a big issue, and so our focus hasn't been on hunter-gatherers, but rather on pastoralists who have no equal power sharing on land and natural resource decision-making processes. And so we created what we call women rights and leadership platforms, which is generally an entry point into which we engage women, but also men, trying to bring them together to have common decisions and equal sharing of power in terms of making decisions around land and natural resources. So basically, the Women Rights and Leadership Forums initially were focused mainly on women to build the capacity of women to be able to engage in open community meetings where key or critical decisions are made around land and natural resources. And so once they have that capacity, we create space to be able to have open discussion, open dialogue between men and women to see what is working and what is not working within the communities and what together they can do about those challenges in terms of trying to come up with a common solution that works for the communities in addressing the gender gap. But also critical that, you know, women have less and less control of economic resources, and so we support economic empowerment initiatives such as the village community bank systems to ensure that women also have access and control of economic resources. But also we've currently initiated, or we are rolling out a curricula that targets norms and attitude change for both men and women, particularly around land and natural resource management, to be able to have equitable space for men and women to make equal decisions, but also to change their perspectives on certain cultures that are oppressive to women and to find ways of addressing some of these oppressive cultural norms. So in a snapshot, in terms of impact, so the map down here is the map of Tanzania, and zoomed out is the northern part of Tanzania in the bigger map. And our work over the years, since 2011, we've been able to secure these communal, the green areas, the collective titles that are used collectively by communities. These are all villages within different districts and regions within Tanzania, northern Tanzania. And these lands are connected to each other, as you can see, to be able to allow mobility of both wildlife and people to access resources that may not be accessible in one place, but accessible in another, but also mobility as an adaptive mechanism for climate change. And that has gone all the way. You can see whatever land, collective lands that were left with for those communities, we were able to secure. And you can see that the lands, collective lands, are either adjacent to protected area. You can see Ngorongoro Conservation Area here. You can see Tarangire here, and several other. We also have the community wildlife management areas, all very close and connected to collective lands. And that again brings the point of the mobility of wildlife and people within these open lands. So the collective title is usually timeless in terms of, you know, it doesn't have a time frame in which, you know, it expires or something like that, but it's up to the entire community to decide and change the use of that land. So in most cases, that will never change because the lifestyle of those communities is pastoralism, and they need that collective tenure to allow collective use of land and natural resources. To the impact, all these lands amount to a total of 1,400,000 hectares that has been secured with titles in the northern part of Tanzania, covering 60 villages. And in those villages, we've been able to reach 350,000 community members with that work. But again, with women platforms, we've been able to reach 45 villages, which means 45 women rights and leadership forums have been created to be able to support women engagement in all these processes. We've also been able to support 100 youth through scholarships for very specific community called their Kie community, which is a hunter-gatherers community, which is currently also not receiving any revenue from any source. So they are very vulnerable, and so that opportunity of scholarship is accessible to them. So in terms of nature-based livelihoods, communities so far have been able to get direct sourcing of funds of $500,000 US, either from community-based tourism or carbon trade. So with the current project that we are, the ICI project, we were very lucky to be one of the 9 members selected. And we first want to thank you, Jeff, for creating that opportunity that is very much needed by communities of these big grants. I think the struggle for us as local organizations have been getting enough funding, but also long-term funding to do the kind of work we do. It's a very complex process that needs long-term funding, but also significant amount of funding. So with the GEF, as I described, we will definitely we are targeting more tenure security in areas that we have not been able to secure tenure. So from our previous interventions, we can see here that we've been able to secure this entire landscape. But now with the GEF grant, we are able to target the villages bounding or bordering the villages that we have done in one area. That is one area in which we will target with tenure security. We will also target these villages. This is it's a wildlife management area, and the neighboring villages will be undertaking a collective land titling. Same as this area in the map, and same as here in some parts of here. So in terms of collective tenure, that is what in 5 years, the ICI grant will support UCRT to attain. But that will also be part of tenure security's governance. So we will do the governance part with within those areas and beyond to support sustainable management of land and natural resources, but to ensure that structures to support those systems are there and they know their roles and responsibilities. So in terms of natural resources, we'll be also looking into these same villages and also villages outside the land tenure title. So beyond this, there will be other villages in the landscape that will be supported in terms of natural resource management. And another critical component is the women rights and leadership forums, which is a mainstreamed process. And all the 41 villages targeted by the GEF grant will also ensure that there is integration of women into the process of land tenure, governance, natural resource management. But there is also a top-up of economic empowerment for pastoral women to ensure that they have that economic power to also support their engagement processes in community-led processes. And So I haven't touched on any challenges, but I'd like to highlight one challenge that is the key issue right now and affecting us. One of the challenges right now we are facing is land evictions, as you may have heard, in the Ngorongoro district, particularly around the Lodiondo area, close to the Serengeti. So these have been community lands for so many years. And it has been a conflict that has existed since 1992, in which an Arab investor was allocated a piece of land within the community's land. And so it's been a struggle over the years to try and move the community out of that land to make way for this hunting company to continue hunting. It has not been possible over the years. There have been a lot of support externally to not move the pastoralist communities out of their land. But this year, that had escalated. There has been a lot of violence. They've been killing. At least one policeman was killed. One community elder has disappeared and believed to be dead because we've not had any trace of him. Many were injured and fled to neighboring Kenya to get some support for treatment. And 27 community leaders are jailed to date because of inciting or said to have incited the communities to riot against the forced eviction. And so we still have 25 of them in prison to date. So that is the current situation of one of our working areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. It's really interesting to hear in such detail about the work that we are able to support thanks to having the Inclusive Conservation Initiative. And I think you all got to see just how important it is and how impactful it can be. And I think it was also, we had an important reminder that displacements and evictions are not something of conservation's past necessarily. And that's another reason why this work remains so important. So we can have some time to take a few questions, I think. I'm looking at the time. And so please offer comment questions or things in the chat, or you can sharing our screen, so it might be a little hard to do. You could go off screen share so I can see if people raise hands.
Maybe, can I just ask, thank you very much. This is really interesting. I'm with International Waters team, which works on ocean and freshwater issues. I was just wondering if you can kind of elaborate on how your experiences are being shared throughout the initiative. There's 9 projects, is that right? And kind of how you're learning from some of the other sites and they're learning from you, and how kind of the broader initiative is going.
That might be.
Yeah.
Turn off the background.
Thank you for the question. I think more than for Pain, it's a question on ICI as a project. So one of the main components that we also have in ICI has 4 components. One is the component that's having the direct investments in the communities and territories for scaling up their conservation actions and the work that they're doing. We have a component also on capacity building that's at the global scale, and this includes exchanges one of the many activities under this is exchanges, and it's going to be exchanges within some projects, within regions, and with the broader IPLC community, who is also doing work in these areas, similar to ICI. This year is the first year of ICI, so at the moment, some projects are currently designing their full impact strategy, because when they applied, it was through an expression of interest. And next year, hopefully early next year, we start with implementation on the ground. And so these exchanges are part of that plan for next year. Also, we have the knowledge platform that we're developing for the ICI, where we will be compiling these experiences for exchanges within some projects, with the GF, with other donors, with friends of ICI and the broader IPLC community. So there are different mechanisms in place for this to be shared among projects and with the wider IPLC community. I hope that addresses your
That's
question.
great.
I can take a look at the chat. So, general question. One question that came to me was just if you could talk a little bit about what it might take to get these communal certificates of customary right. So that process, what is involved in getting that recognition, and what does it take, and what might be some of the barriers that communities face in doing that, and you're helping with.
Thank you. So the legal framework, fortunately, in Tanzania allows for both collective and individual titles. That's one of the biggest advantages we have in terms of legal support and government support. So it is a very long process. Usually takes us maybe a month or so in the field. And it also depends really on the nature of the land conflict. That is a key issue, because some conflicts have taken us 5 years to resolve, and some not too intense, a month and you're done. But it's usually a process which involves community, an entire village, adult village population, meetings, discussions, and general education of the laws and policies around land and natural resources in Tanzania for their understanding. And once they're ready for this process, it is the work that we do with the communities. When we talk about village boundaries, it's about walking through the village boundaries, or going through with the community members to identify those village boundaries, and having meetings with neighboring villages to see that there is no existing conflict on that particular boundary, so that you can be able to do a GPS demarcation around the boundaries and produce the village land certificate, which is endorsed by the government, after ensuring that this process has engaged everyone that is supposed to be engaged.
Yeah, thank you. I would also wonder, just taking some of the lessons that I saw from some of the work completed, that this work has to be done. I would assume, if you're coming out with GPS, that's a lot of work that is done by people who, must have some education and access to resources. And is that a real barrier for communities to actually claim access to their land? Does that cause problems for people?
So in most cases, communities don't have these skills. We support with those skills, but we also have government support. The local government is a key partner in implementing this process. So we do have our own skills as an institution, but we also have government support skills in this process.
Yeah, that really highlights the value and the importance of supporting work like yours. Terrence? Terrence, would you like to ask a question? I see that you.
Yeah. So thanks, Sarah. So nice to see you again, Payne. So I had a question. In July, the first Africa Protected Areas and Conserved Areas Congress happened in Kigali, and there was a lot of discussion about access to finance for grassroots organizations in Africa. Malia Sili released a report on during the Congress. Do you have any reflections from the ICI about how the GEF and donors can facilitate this direct access to finance for indigenous peoples and local communities? And I had one second question, which is UCRT is a member of the global ICCA consortium. Are there any advantages you see of this South-South cooperation that could be supported through increased scaling up by donors? Thank you.
So I'm not sure I got the second part of the question.
The second part was the ICCA consortium has membership across many countries in Africa, and there was the Goma Declaration in June in the margins of the open-ended working group around access to finance. So I'm just wondering whether from those declarations is something you'd like to comment to the audience today.
Okay, so finance, and again, I'll speak from my own perspective. A lot of the funding we still get through international NGOs, and there is a lot of work to be done on the ground. And I think more direct funding would really help to achieve more. And so this is still a challenge for grassroots organizations. And with the GEF funding, it's a step, but there's still a lot that can be done to support local initiatives to achieve more. We still have a lot of land out there that has not been secured. And I think the biggest constraint to secure vast landscapes is funding. And that has really slowed our progress towards, securing more and more community-held lands.
I want to add something. Yes. Thank you, Terence, for that question. Actually, I want to add something regarding the first part of your question. I think ICI is one of the first tangible on-the-ground examples of what direct financing should be looking like for increasing the access for indigenous peoples and local communities. There is a lot that needs to be done yet by the wider donor community. I know there's a lot of talk going on. There's a lot of discourse, like last year in Glasgow, for example, and also at these regional meetings that happened. But in reality, the actions are still missing. The matching actions to the discourse is missing. That's the reality on the ground. Also, when we speak of direct financing, we really have to see closely at the nitty-gritty of what are these other mechanisms that are being set up, because in ICI, indigenous peoples and local communities are defining the priorities. They're governing the implementation of the project. They're setting the pace. They're making the decisions. They're the members of the steering committee that's going to be governing the financing. So what is inclusive conservation financing looking like on the ground? I think ICI is coming to set an example of what the wider donor community needs to also be doing. I really hope that these promises, for example, at Climate Change COP last year, it's going to be interesting to see what they're going to be reporting on the ground this year in Egypt, because I think there's a gap. I think ICI is in a really advantageous situation or place to set the tone and the example of what needs to be done. I think the GEF has opened that path, and others need to start taking actions towards that. I'll leave it at that. I think way more work needs to be done, way more actions that show commitment from the donor community need to be done. Because it's not matching. The discourse and the actions are not matching at this time. I think Sarah, when she opened earlier, she made reference to the very low percentage of financing that is reaching Indigenous peoples directly. So I think way much more work, serious work and serious commitment actions need to be happening.
Just to add, sorry.
No, please.
I think it's also critical to understand the situational context of grassroots organizations. The context, and again, from my own perspective, I think it's very critical to make or keep the work moving. And some of the processes can be also stagnating the work. You know, you can secure this big funding, but the actual process we go through can be a bit also complex, bureaucratical. And so I think it's very important to analyze all these and what is needed, what is the pressure. Because if we continue staggering at that pace, more and more land is lost. And this land is critical, not just for the people, but also for the wildlife that live within it. So it's very important to analyze the context, which Indigenous people or which grassroots organizations are we talking about, what is their situation, and what do they need to keep their work moving? And how do big organizations also reduce that, stagnating process or bureaucratical process?
Thank you, Pam. That's quite an important call to ask how we can make it easier to access finance and reduce bureaucracy. I did see a hand from Lucy. I don't know if you would like to ask a question or unmute.
No, I was just adding a point. This is Lucy Magembe from the Nature Conservancy. Can you hear me?
Yes. Our audio is a little shaky in here, but please go ahead.
Yeah. So no, I was saying I'm Lucy Magembe. I am from the Nature Conservancy. And Payne, how are you, Payne? We work closely with Payne in Arusha. I just wanted to add a point with regards to additional funding. Oops, it's very shaky. So at the moment, we are working with Payne as UCRT to look at issues of soil carbon as an alternative funding source that can go directly to the community. So I just wanted to share that extra option in terms of putting in more money into the communities. We, UCRT and TNC, and we have been working together with other partners like Carbon Tanzania as well to bring Red Cross related funding to some of the communities also in Arusha and other places. So utilizing the carbon route is one option, but as Payne has said, really helping out how to get like GEF funding and those other resources out there, but reducing the cumbersome process would be very helpful. Thank you.
It's hard to.
Yeah,
It's really hard.
I think she was commenting on soil carbon and how they've been working, I think, in Tanzania to try to help communities access Red Plus resources and soil carbon. I mean, I think this brings up the point that very little of the money through RED is actually getting down to these communities, to Indigenous peoples who are actually doing this on the groundwork. And so in a way that's, that is another reason why supporting initiatives like the Inclusive Conservation Initiative is so important. Well, our financing comes specifically from the biodiversity focal area of the GEF. We see many other benefits that accrue as a result, and definitely welcome, folks who are looking at how do you bridge this gap between kind of the big scale financing, some of the challenges and necessities of those efforts to actually getting the money to people on the ground so that they can stay in their territories and, have some, say, combine those resources for cash needs with the subsistence activities they're already doing. They can support, these efforts on registering communal lands or doing other activities on the ground that they need, but it allows people to stay in their territories and practicing these practices that have existed since time immemorial. So I am looking to see if we have other questions in the chat. Yes, so Lucy also added in the chat that the Tanzanian government, I believe, is developing regulations regarding carbon to ensure that benefit sharing is observed, which sounds great, and maybe something that we can be working to share that experience and bring it forward. I'll offer the experience having visited in Kenya that I saw that you could have a new land law or land program, but then you actually need to have the people kind of working on the ground to make that happen. Are there any other questions? Okay, Peter.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for the remarks. I'm Peter. I'm here in the GEF Secretariat. I work mainly in our front office with our CEO and also with our policy office. I just wanted to ask, the maps that you were showing, these wonderful maps, if I understood well, you go through a participatory process with the communities to develop these maps, which I guess takes some time. And may have to go back and forth. And then the government, it sounds like the legal framework does have a recognition of communal land. And so I'm wondering if the process you go through is strong enough or is able to sort of convince, be presented then to, allow the boundaries and the claims that you're hoping to achieve be put out there. And I was just going to ask, as an example, you mentioned there's this case of evictions in that one area, and I was interested. I couldn't quite get. Did you say because there's some organization that wants to have it for hunting? Is that what it is? And so, how would the strength of the community mapping and the participatory mapping work in a situation like that?
Yeah. So, as you've seen in the map, the work we've been able to do was in other areas. So the area in conflict is one of the areas we've been trying to support with collective tenure for a very long time. However, the challenge has been conflicting interests. There's the government interest versus investor interest versus community interest. So it was never possible at one point to work together with the government to achieve this collective tenure.
So you are still working on, because I was, having the same question, because it seems like it's fantastic that the Tanzanian government is supporting this, land tenure issue as a part of the GEF program. I think it's really great, and that you're working on the governance as well. But if there was a land eviction and the government supported a land tenure for the local community, then what is the action by the government side? Or it's still, the discussing how to secure the land tenure between the community and these private hunting companies and.
So I think the issue there is money. So if there is a lot of money put on the table, then the decision making is compromised, whether to support the communities or to support the investor that is giving a lot of money to them. So that is the big issue.
Verna?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It's actually very, very inspiring. I have questions. The first one is on the women's platform. I think it's amazing. It's impressive that you're able to build that. I was curious to know what kind of hurdles or challenges you face creating this platform and engaging men, because that's really a very, very important piece of what you did, because this is all about changing mindsets, as you mentioned, stereotypes and social practices. So I just wanted to know more about the process of getting to the success that you shared. The second question relates to the livelihood that you raised, the livelihood earnings that you mentioned. Given that it's a communal communal land, and I was also wondering, what is the mechanism for sharing this benefit, or was your plan to use this to scale up or to be more sustainable? Thank you.
So in your first sharing, the resources that are collected belong to the entire community. So the communities made a collective decision that these resources will go to specific processes or initiatives that will support the entire community. Social services, for example, building schools or building hospitals that will support and benefit everyone. So that is the current mechanism. Going forward, I'm not sure if that will change, and if it will change, maybe a different mechanism will work for them. But currently, that is the process. In terms of creating the Women Rights and Leadership Platform, initially, we saw the challenge in women's participation and engagement. And that was really because of lack of capacity and the courage. They've culturally been brought up to be the less engaged people or not to engage, and it is a sin to engage in or to be vocal. And so traditionally within the pastoral setting, there is a systematic traditional male governing system that already existed. So creating the Women Rights and Leadership Forums was sort of a parallel platform in which women could also be leaders, but also engage in these processes. So you build the capacity of this platform to ensure that they bring in or create some social movement within the community, to make sure that there is a collective voice of women, and to bring them together with the existing male traditional structure, and just say, let's have a conversation. What is it that is going on well, and what is not going on well, and what can we do about it to change? And that is the part that has worked more, really engaging more parties. But now the rollout of the social norms curriculum really went into engagement of all parties. Have women discuss about these issues, have men discuss about these issues, then let's have men and women discuss these issues and see how they can address some of these challenges, using the approach or perspective that this has to do with family development or the entire community's development if women are left behind, or if men and women don't work together.
That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions on the chat or hands. We have about 10 minutes left in our time. So I don't know if there's any last. Oh,
I have another question. Actually, you mentioned about the youth scholarship. What exactly that scholarship works? in the program, if you can explain a bit more about this.
Okay.
The GEF is, trying to expand more for the youth engagement.
So I mentioned two groups that we work with, the pastoralists and the hunter-gatherers. So pastoralists, their nature or lifestyle is, going out, you hunt and you gather wild fruits and honey, and that's how they go through the day and their lifestyle. So really, unlike pastoralists where they have livestock and they can sell and send their children to school, they don't have much to sell and maybe put their children through school. So particularly potential kids within, it's a very small community, not more than 5,000 in number. And so the kids that have some potentials, we create that space that they can access resources to attend either primary school, go through secondary, or technical skills to support them. So it's that.
You're more for them to participate in
Yes.
the education or some.
Yes.
I have one more question, Sarah. If I can just ask, on the natural resource management element of the work that you're doing, I saw that you, part of it is putting together, it looks like plans, land use plans, things like that. And if I understood, this is based on bringing in the traditional ways, the traditional indigenous ways of doing it. I wonder if it's, because I suppose the traditional ways, the indigenous peoples, didn't have written plans and things like that. So I wonder how that is, if it's a challenge to put it into that kind of a framework, or if that's just a real opportunity.
Yeah, they don't have written plans, but technically, these communities have all the plans in their head and those regulations. But now for the titling process, it's part of the requirement to have written bylaws. And it is those written traditional practices that are incorporated into the development of natural resource bylaws. So it's more of putting into writing what they
do and have know already.
Yes.
And that process is, it's okay. It's, I mean, yeah.
It's okay, because what is critical and important for them is to ensure the collective security, but also to ensure that they protect and manage that land in a traditional context that is practical and acceptable to all communities.
See one question online, and this question is changing their lifestyle from gathering to market system part of your objectives? So I guess for hunter-gatherers is part of your goal. Does not sound like that, but we can clarify that. So the goal with your support that you're undertaking is kind of to allow them to continue to be hunter-gatherers rather than seek other opportunities so that their kids can go to school.
No,
Sorry.
we are not systematically changing their cultural practices. I think they will arrive at a point if they want to change their cultural practices, they'll make a collective decision around that. But our role is not to interfere or to change or to try and impose something different.
Yeah. And then providing scholarships allows them to continue their practices as such while the kids go to school. So I think we're coming up on the end of our time. And so with that, I'd like to Lucy, would you have Lucy Malenke, do you have anything that you would like to add or say?
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Payne and Shirley, for that good presentation. And I think shows how the progress is all through. Thank you, Sarah, for organizing this, and everyone, and just want to wish everyone all the best. I don't know, I heard some noise behind there. I don't know what's up. I hear myself speak. So, and I just wanted to say thank you very much. I think it was really a very, very good presentation. I was also able to really get more information about the area, and I'm happy for Pain to be able to highlight this. I think I want to wish everyone all the best. Really a success for us. IPAC, I think the process has been very recruits, and just want to say thank you all, and thank you, Anita, and everyone else for the great work, and IUCN, and the partners in CI, so on for all the great work. Thank you. Thank you.
Luis is also, maybe. Okay.
So thank you so much, Lucy. Remind everyone, Lucy is the chair of our Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group, and she is also Maasai. So brings some real knowledge of some of the particular challenges that that Karen is facing, and that we face in this region. And I think I just want to add that from the time that I visited in Kenya, I was just kind of amazed. It was to see elephants and people and cows like right next to each other. This is something that, coming from some of the places I've worked, it just doesn't seem I don't know, possible. And so just as we drove around, we're driving on community lands, we're seeing elephants, giraffes, zebra, all kinds of antelopes. And so you really can see that you can have these communities living on the land as well as realizing real conservation benefits. So I want to thank you for sharing then the experience of how you actually make that happen. Before we close, I just want to offer or ask Claude Gascon, Program Director for the GEF, to share a few of his reflections and thoughts, and then we will call it a day.
Thank you, Sarah. And can you hear me well? Can you hear me? Yes? Can you hear me?
Very well, Claude. I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry. Good. Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everybody for participating. Anita, thank you so much for the blessing and for mentioning Gustavo, our dear friend. He was perhaps the biggest champion of empowering IPLCs in the GEF, and he worked very hard to get us to where we are. And thank you for that. Thanks to Payne as well, and UCRT, and the great presentation. As we all know, conservation of biodiversity depends on good land tenure and governance. And the GEF has funded this approach to secure land tenure and governance in a variety of places, while we involved Indigenous peoples and local communities. But up until recently, it was done within a variety of projects, but not specifically aimed at empowering IPLCs. And several years ago, with the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group, and Lucy, thank you for championing that. We were able to develop a project or a program of Inclusive Conservation Initiative, which had, fortunately, at the negotiations of GEF-7, had some political momentum that allowed us to include that initiative in the GEF-7 replenishment package. And this was very, very important because it allowed us to have dedicated resources to channel directly to Indigenous peoples and local community organizations, like we do with government agencies, with the more substantial part of our resources. And that's important because what we've seen today is an example of how empowering IPLCs in the case of the example that Payne gave us, really can develop and deliver global environmental benefits of a variety of sources. And this is even more true when we support Indigenous peoples or Indigenous women's groups who most often are disenfranchised by the land tenure and governance issues, and it's important that we revert that. So this is just one good example of how the Inclusive Conservation Initiative is actually achieving what it set out to achieve, which is really to empower IPLCs and deliver multiple benefits. And we often talk about biodiversity conservation, but the kind of work that we've seen today will have tremendous benefits as well for climate change in terms of carbon sequestration, will increase resilience and adaptation potential of these local communities to changes in climate change, as well as just fighting basic land degradation issues. And if we look ahead to the next 2 months or 3 months with 2 COPs, the COP27 and the COP15, it's very clear that we're not going to be able to achieve any of these global goals, whether it's 1.5 degrees or 30 by 30, without the clear support to IPLCs and the recognition of the role that they play in terms of land tenure, conservation, climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. So I would just like to congratulate our partners, IUCN and CI, and organizations like UCRT and leaders like Payne, because this is exactly what the Inclusive Conservation Initiative was set out to do. And we're very happy we were able to include a second tranche for ICI, or the Inclusive Conservation Initiative, in the GEF-8 replenishment envelope. And so we will be proceeding to fund yet another $25 million project as part of GEF-8, which will have the same model, which will be able to include lessons learned, improve on what we've done, although I think we're doing fairly well, but improve on what we've done, and continue to deliver global environmental benefits through the leadership of Indigenous peoples and local communities. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a very good afternoon. We can't hear you, Sarah. I think the room is muted. We can hear you now. No. Maybe it's just me, but I can't hear. I can't hear anything. Okay, there we go. I think the room is unmuted.
Okay, so I just wanted to thank everyone. I did see a little comment that said that 30 by 30 is the most dangerous thing to IPLCs. We can just agree to disagree on that point. The GEF has long funded and supported Indigenous conservation, and for us, it wasn't about what's the name, what's the category, IUCN category, or the precise legal structure that's used. What we're caring about is results and ensuring rights at the same time. And so if we take that perspective, that what we're trying to do is protect biodiversity, we're trying to protect rights. It doesn't, the title that's given to things, I think we need to be more open and flexible in that. And we see that with the growing recognition of OECFs or other effective area-based conservation measures. And we are definitely supporting many of those in many different places. So with that, I'll close. Say thank you very much to Pim for joining us. It's so nice to be in person again, and hopefully we'll be figuring out our hybrid BVLs for the future. So thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Okay.